Hey, it's Vas here from Aussie RC Playground, and today we're going to be doing something a little different. I'm going to be giving you my top 5 worst aeroplanes that I've owned and flown so far. So I've been flying for about 5 or 6 years. I've had somewhere between 30 to 40 aeroplanes. I've probably flown a lot more than that because I've actually flown some of my friends' aeroplanes. And during that time, I've built pretty much all of them. I repaired them after crashes and little mishaps. I've modified them, enhanced them, and made them my own in some way or another. So I guess I do have a little bit of experience with this. But that being said, I haven't flown all the aeroplanes that exist out there. I probably haven't flown all the bad ones either. So this is just my own personal list from the planes that I have owned. I'm sure that there are worse planes out there than the ones that are here, and some that are here I think some people may even like, and you may even have some yourself that you're enjoying thoroughly. This worst list is kind of formed based on the entire assembly process, how the plane arrived, how easy was it to put together, and of course how did it fly? Did it have any bad characteristics, or did it have anything go wrong with it? All of these sort of things kind of made me realize, that was a pretty bad plane. There's a reason why I no longer own that plane, or a reason why that crashed or whatever. So I will be doing a top 5 best aeroplanes that I've owned and probably even currently own. So that will come a little bit later on, but for now we'll focus on the worst of, and we'll start off with number 5. So number 5 on this list might be a little bit controversial because it is in fact from Eurofly. It is the Sidewinder. Now, unfortunately, I don't have video footage of the Sidewinder. I did have footage of it, but I may have wiped that memory card at some point or another, and I no longer have kind of line of sight footage of it. I only have some FPV footage, which is a real shame because when I first flew this wing, it actually flew pretty well. I did enjoy my first flight with it, but things started to go south quite quickly. I think on my first landing, I broke the propeller. I think on my second or third flight, the ESC, which I think was a 50 amp ESC, that went out, and it really had no power to the motor whatsoever. And then of course the deal breaker for me was the fact that it flooded really badly at full speed. So this was a major problem, a major design flaw for this wing. That being said, 2 other friends that were with me also owned this wing, and they didn't get the flutter. So I don't know if it was something to do with mine specifically. I even tried the same props that they were using. They tried my prop. All of these things we swapped around, and I would always get the flutter. And I think one of them slightly did, but the other one, he didn't really have any flutter at all. So I don't know what was wrong with mine specifically. I know that there's been some people out there that have said that the fluttering is definitely prominent. It's there. Other people don't really complain about it too much. It was a bit of a shame. The other thing that kind of annoyed me was the fact that they put this plastic leading edge on the wings, which was a really good thing to protect the foam from getting knocked when you're landing on grass and things like that. So it was a really good idea, but they painted it black when it was white underneath. And then of course the black paint started to peel off and it looked terrible. So yeah, I just didn't really enjoy my time with that wing. It was also quite difficult to wingtip launch. It did have a hand grip underneath to sort of launch it from underneath, but the prop is right behind your hand. And if you're not careful, you can very easily cut your fingers when you launch the wing. And I do believe some people out there have done that. So not really the best wing that I ever owned, and definitely deserving to be on this list, especially with the fluttering that it had. So number 4 on the list is taken up by the Pilatus PC9. This is also a Hobby King plane. It's no longer available on their site, which was a bit of a shame. I really liked the design of this plane. It was just finished off terribly. The paintwork was really bad. The assembly process was a bit of a pain. I actually had to change out one of the control rods. I think it went to my elevator or the rudder. They were coming out in the wrong spot. So I had to disassemble that, fix that up. My elevator surface had like a big smile in it. It was like curvy. I think that was just the way that it was packed in the box. The foam wasn't cleaned up very well, so there was like all this leftover pressed foam from when it was injected molded or whatever it is. So it just wasn't a very well finished off plane. To top it all off, it did feel a little bit underpowered. It had an electric canopy, so there was an XT60 plug on the outside of the plane. You'd put a battery into it, flick a switch on your radio, and then the canopy would open. You'd unplug the battery, plug the battery back inside the plane's fuselage, and then you'd have full control of everything else, you know, close the hatch, all this sort of thing. Really cool concept, very good idea, except for the fact that the canopy only opened about 45 degrees. And of course you had to deal with the fact that there was an extra mechanism and a servo in there and everything else. The CG was also very bad on this plane because it was only like 20 or 25 millimeters in from the leading edge of the wings. It was just not a very well designed and thought out plane. I think they should have done away with the electric canopy, and if they were going to include it, it should have been something that would open a lot more than about 45 degrees. Then there was another issue as well, which had very little room inside the cockpit for the battery. So the fuselage didn't have a lot of room there. I think the biggest battery you could fit was like a 2200 4S. That was really about it. It did say that in the manual that you could use up to a 26 from memory, but there's no way you're going to fit anything bigger than a 2200. It was very, very hard to get a bigger battery in there. It was just not a very good plane overall. I didn't really enjoy my experience. It didn't fly terribly. It actually flew half decent, but it had this tricycle landing gear, which was the nose wheel was a little bit fragile as well. So if you didn't have a good runway to take off and land from, the nose wheel would take a bit of a beating. So yeah, in the end, I ended up selling that plane to somebody else before I crashed it. I did end up upgrading the motor and ESC on that, which gave it a lot of speed. But yeah, just definitely deserving of number 4 on the list. So next up at number 3, we have the Lancaster V2. Yet again, another Hobby King plane. The Lancaster V2 was a bomber aeroplane. It had 4 motors on it. It looked fantastic. You know, the paint scheme and everything looked very authentic, very scale looking aircraft. One major problem. When you get an aeroplane, it's just an aeroplane in general, there's usually a piece of balsa or somewhere that sort of indicates, you know, with some battery straps where your battery is meant to go. In the Lancaster, it was no different. They had a little spot for your battery to go into. I made a bit of a rookie mistake, something that I should have known better by this stage because I had been flying for a while. And I just trusted the design of the plane that was where the battery was going to go. There was nothing else for me to do. And I put the plane together, made sure everything was working correctly, and went out to the field to fly it for the first time without checking my CG. This of course led to a rather disastrous landing because the plane was incredibly tail heavy, and it flew terribly on the first flight. I was able to bring it down with only some minor damage to one of the landing gear. I broke a couple of props and I had some minor scuffs, and that was really about it. So I was very lucky that I was able to land the plane. But you know, the battery needed to move way far forward, and in order to do that I had to hack up the wings. There was a couple of tabs on the wings that would screw into the fuselage. I had to glue the wings now because I had to go past those tabs and move the battery as far forward as it could possibly go. And then I also added 3 AA batteries right up in the nose, and I used AA's because I didn't have any lead weights, but I needed to put some extra nose weight on this plane. So it was very poorly designed. The paint also kind of peeled off a little bit in my fingers. It started to come off. Landing gear wasn't too bad, but with a lot of these Hobby King planes, I noticed that with their electric retracts, they don't glue them in properly. They don't reinforce the landing gear correctly. It's not so much the retracts that are the issue, it's how they're mounted to the aeroplane that's the problem. So I had to kind of reinforce those as well. And that was really about it. The plane flew okay when I did have the CG correct, but it always felt like it was dragging its back end. So it didn't have a rudder. You had to bank and yank this one, and every time you banked, the plane would sort of drop the tail end. It would sort of turn looking like this as opposed to being completely horizontal. So it would always turn like this, which was really weird because a lot of the other planes I can do bank and yank and they'll hold their position quite nicely. This one just wouldn't do it. I don't know if the rudders were a bit too small. You know, the vertical stabilizers, maybe they weren't scaled correctly. Maybe really needed to have working rudders to make it all work properly, so you coordinate your turns and make it look a little bit nicer. The control surfaces on the ailerons were also very small and didn't have a lot of movement. The way that they were designed was actually quite bad. So doing a roll with the plane, you had to get a lot of height, and it would take like 3 hours to complete a roll. It was really not the best aircraft, and in the end I ended up selling it because it was just taking up room, and I wanted something else to kind of take up its spot, and something that I would enjoy flying a hell of a lot more. So moving on to number 2, and this one's going to be a little bit controversial because it's a fairly recent plane from Hobby King. In fact, it's actually a plane from Eurofly again. I have to say, Eurofly makes some amazing planes. I've actually got some of their planes here currently, and they actually do a very good job, but it almost feels as though they have 2 separate factories when they make their planes. They have one that makes their really good top-end quality planes like the Tundra and the Excalibur, but then you have planes like the Eurofly Bonanza, which I dubbed the Bozo. This plane, I really didn't like this plane. A lot of people online seem to love it, and to be honest with you, when I bought this plane, I was in love with it straight away. I love the size of it, I love the simplicity of it, the whole idea of having something that's about 800 millimeters, maybe a little bit longer than that, that doesn't have any landing gear, that it's just a nice belly lander, looks really cool, flies reasonably quick, is acrobatic, it's just something fun that you can keep in the back of your car with a couple of charged batteries in a glove box, and if you're out on a trip somewhere, you can just pull over at a nearby area and have a quick flight and enjoy yourself. The entire, the whole concept of this aeroplane really grabbed me, and I had to buy one, and so I bought one. And to my surprise, when I got it, the assembly process started to really sour my taste buds quite a bit. There was a lot of gluing involved, and a lot of the way that the plane kind of went together just didn't really feel like a proper Eurofly aeroplane. It almost feels like they've outsourced this one, and they've gone, oh yeah, that seems good enough to put our name to it, and that's the Eurofly Bonanza. Then there was the flight characteristics. This thing, the first time it flew terribly. It felt tail heavy, it wanted to stall the whole time. It just did not really go according to plan. The cowling is super paper thin. One little rough landing with the cowling, you're going to break it and shatter it. My first landing didn't end up being super smooth, so I had to tape up the cowling, and then sure enough on my next landing, which didn't work out too good because the plane stalled, the cowling smashed up and I had to do some major repairs to the aircraft. Thankfully, I managed to fix it all up. I ended up replacing the speed controller and the motor. The motor is way too small for the aeroplane. The battery they recommend is a 1500 milliamp 3S. That is completely wrong. You need to run it on a 2200 3S because the plane needs some additional nose weight. In fact, I actually put a couple of bits of lead weight on the nose to make sure that the plane would actually fly correctly. So it needs a lot of nose weight, and yeah, it didn't really go well with me. Unfortunately, the plane did crash. I think something went wrong. I have a sneaky suspicion it was the ESC that was browning out my receiver and causing issues. So that ESC is now in the bin because, to be honest, I've used that particular receiver that was in that plane was actually in another plane that I didn't have any problems with. But on this plane with that ESC, it caused some problems, and I think that's what caused the plane to crash. But overall, the Eurofly Bonanza, aka the Bozo, ended up in the bin, and I'm glad to see that plane gone. It was a terrible investment, and I will not be buying another. Okay, so that takes us to number 1, and number 1 was the Avios Hawker Sea Fury. This plane was not bought by me, nor was it sent to me for review. This plane was actually won on the Hobby King website. A few years ago, Hobby King had this thing where you could trade in the points that you acquired by making regular purchases to get tokens that would then enter you into a draw to win certain prizes, certain products that they would put up for, I suppose, lucky draw, lucky dip, I don't know. So I think I put all of about $10 worth of tokens into this plane, and hey presto, I ended up winning the plane, which was fantastic. So I got the plane. The assembly process of the plane was actually pretty straightforward. I'm not going to really complain too much about the assembly. The detail on this aircraft was amazing. It had LED lights, split flaps, bomb drops, electric retracts. Everything was just super well detailed. It had little missiles that you can put underneath the wings and everything. The plane looked amazing. It was my first true warbird, but unfortunately, this thing flew like a pig with wings. It was just a terrible aeroplane. It felt underpowered. It felt heavy the entire time that I flew this aeroplane. No matter how many times I flew it or I tried to be good with it, it felt heavy in the sky. It felt like at any moment this thing's going to drop out and just completely obliterate itself on landing. It was just a really bad aeroplane to fly. I really did not enjoy this aeroplane at all. I had a couple of good crashes with it. One crash ended up in a tree because it just stalled really bad as I was trying to get off the ground. So I ended up doing, I think that was the last time I repaired it. I think I went to fly it one last time. I may have flown it one last time actually, and then I damaged the landing gear on the landing as well after I repaired it. And I just gave up on it. I'm like, you know what, I'm done with this. I ended up giving the plane away to one of the guys at work who stripped all the electrics out of it, bar the motor, so that he could have the prop on there. And he's got it hanging it up in his garage somewhere. It's just a static model now. That was pretty much the end of the Hawker Sea Fury. But it had other issues. It had, the landing gear was very fragile. It just didn't, again, with a lot of these Hobby King planes, the landing gear just doesn't seem to be secured to the main wing very well. It's not the mechanism itself that's weak, it's just the way that it's attached to the aeroplane. Just there's no strength there. So a bit of a rough landing, you come on some rough terrain and then bang, the landing gear just rips out. The main prop hub that holds all the propeller blades, because it had individual propeller blades, that had the world's most brittle plastic holding everything together. So the minute you nose dipped a little bit because you got the bump on your landing strip, it would just break that hub. And a couple of times I went there with the plane ready to fly, had a bit of a nose dip, bang, broken hub, had to come home and fix the plane again. And then of course parts became very hard to get a hold of, and the last time I fixed the plane, like I said, I gave it away and it's now a static model. So that's pretty much for this, that's pretty much the end of this video. Thank you all very much for watching. If you enjoyed this, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you have any comments down, put them down below. If you're a pilot yourself, what is the worst plane that you've actually flown, that you've owned or flown? Something that you've just regretted, investing good money into because it was just a terrible aircraft. Even if it is something that somebody else really likes, like what I think the Bonanza is and the Sidewinder, for example. I think those planes are actually planes that some people out there enjoy, but I had a terrible experience with them. It didn't really do it for me. That's why they're on this list. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what your worst aircraft is. But for now, I'm going to leave it here. Thank you again for watching, and I'll be speaking to you all next time.